It was 7:51 on a Thursday morning when the young woman in the borrowed blazer set her portfolio on the registration table and the man behind it looked up, looked her over, and laughed. Not a full laugh, just enough. "You're here for the Meridian?" he said. "Yes, sir." "This your first time applying?" "Third." He looked back down at his papers. "Right. Well, good luck with that." His name was Douglas Fenn, 58 years old, director of the Meridian Engineering Fellowship, the most competitive technical prize in Atlantic Canada. 12 weeks of paid mentorship at Dalhousie's Applied Sciences Lab, a $175,000 research grant, and a seat on the national panel that reviewed infrastructure proposals from coast to coast. In 26 years of the fellowship, every recipient had come from one of 4 universities. Every single one. The young woman's name was Thea Collard, 24 years old. She had driven 4 hours from Shediac the night before in a car that had no working heat and a passenger side window that didn't close all the way. She had worn her roommate's blazer over her own sweater because her own jacket had a tear at the left elbow she hadn't had time to mend. She had a thermos of gas station coffee and a portfolio she had rebuilt from scratch after her laptop died in February and took 3 months of work with it. She placed her registration form on the table. Fenn took it without looking at her again. She went and sat in the 3rd row. To understand what happened next, you need to understand the room. And to understand the room, you need to understand Thea. She had grown up in a small house off Route 134 in Shediac, the kind of house where the hot water worked most of the time and the furnace worked when it felt like it. Her mother, Claudine, had cleaned rooms at the Shediac Bay Resort since Thea was 7. Nights and weekends mostly. The kind of job where you memorize which guests leave tips and which ones leave a mess and learn not to expect either to tell you anything about the person. Claudine was good at her work. She did not talk about it much. Neither did Thea. What Thea talked about was the bridge, not a specific bridge, all of them. She had been obsessed with how things held together since she was 5 years old. And her father took her across the Confederation Bridge for the first and only time before he left. She remembered standing on the back seat to see out the window. This was before proper car seats were enforced on that stretch, and watching the water through the concrete rails and thinking, something thought about all of this. Something calculated every piece of it. She wanted to know who. She wanted to know how. Her father did not come back, but the bridge stayed with her. By 9, she was taking apart the garden shed behind the house and putting it back together with better drainage and a reinforced corner post. The neighbor 2 doors down, a retired civil engineer named O'Coin, who smelled like pipe tobacco and had 3,000 books, noticed. He lent her a textbook on structural analysis. She returned it in 2 weeks with 12 pages of notes tucked inside. He lent her 4 more. She never returned those without questions. She graduated at the top of her Moncton High School class. She got into the engineering program at the Université de Moncton on a partial scholarship. Partial. Claudine picked up a second job cleaning offices on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. She did not tell Thea until the following March. Thea found out because a classmate saw her mother's name on the cleaning company's employee list posted at the student center. Thea went home that weekend and told her mother she had found a part-time job. She hadn't. She did by Monday. She graduated with distinction. She applied for the Meridian Fellowship in her first year after graduation. She did not get it. She applied again in her second year. She did not get it. Douglas Fenn had been on the selection panel both times. He had never voted for her. His official notes described her work as technically competent, but lacking in applied scope. What the notes did not say, but what one junior panel member later told a colleague in a hallway at a conference in Halifax, was simpler than that. Fenn had a word for candidates from smaller regional schools. He used it at dinner. He used it when he thought no one was listening. The word was parochial. Thea had qualified for the 3rd application on objective merit scores alone. No one could keep her off the shortlist, so she was on the shortlist. And Fenn had spent the last 6 weeks preparing to make sure she didn't get past it. What he had done was this. The Meridian selection process had 3 stages: a written technical submission, a 40-minute panel review, and a live presentation in front of the full fellowship board and invited guests. The live presentation required candidates to respond to a prompt given to them 20 minutes before they went on stage. The prompt was chosen by the director. That was Fenn. 3 days before the selection event, Fenn had submitted the prompts for all 6 candidates to the administrative coordinator. 5 candidates received a prompt in the standard format. Describe a structural or civil engineering challenge in your region and propose a preliminary solution framework. Thea's prompt was different. Her prompt asked her to present a full cost-benefit analysis of carbon-integrated concrete applications in tidal infrastructure, with specific reference to current regulatory barriers under the Canada Infrastructure Bank's 2023 mandate, and to address the material fatigue variables identified in a 2019 joint paper from the National Research Council. It was a graduate-level research question. It required familiarity with documents that were not listed in the fellowship brief. It required knowledge that most working engineers would have to look up. What Fenn did not know was that Thea had read that 2019 NRC paper when it came out. She had read it because she had been following its lead author's work since her 3rd year of university. She had printed it off at the library, annotated it in blue pen, and kept it in the accordion folder she had been using as a filing system since 2021. She didn't know Fenn had given her a different prompt. She wouldn't know until she walked into the preparation room and opened the envelope. She had 20 minutes. The Halifax Convention Center had 2 spaces in use that morning. There was the preparation suite. 6 small rooms off the main corridor, 1 per candidate, timed and monitored. And there was the main presentation hall, which held 400 seats and was, by 8:45, approximately 300 of them filled. The audience was not small. There were engineers, researchers, government representatives, 3 journalists, a camera crew from CBC Nova Scotia, a table of Dalhousie faculty, 2 representatives from the Canada Infrastructure Bank, and, in the 7th row from the front, Claudine Collard in a gray wool coat she had borrowed from a woman at work because her own coat had a broken zipper she hadn't gotten around to fixing. She had swapped her Thursday cleaning shift with a colleague to be there. She had taken the bus from the station at 6 in the morning. She had a bottle of water and a biscuit in her bag from the Tim Hortons at the terminal, wrapped in a paper napkin. For after, she had told herself. At 8:47, the candidates were led to their preparation rooms. Each received a sealed envelope. Each had exactly 20 minutes before they were called to present. Thea sat down at the small desk. She opened the envelope. She read the prompt. She read it again. Her face did not change. She set the paper down on the desk and looked at it for 11 seconds. Later, she would not be able to explain why she counted. She just did. Around her, the other 5 candidates were in their own rooms, presumably reading their own prompts, presumably beginning to outline responses. She had seen their faces in the waiting area. 2 of them were from Dalhousie. 1 was from McGill. 1 was from UNB. 1 was from UBC. All of them had strong files. All of them were good. None of them had been given what she was holding. She understood 4 things in the time it took her to pour a glass of water from the carafe on the desk. First, this was not a mistake. Standard prompts were drafted by committee, reviewed and locked weeks in advance. A deviation of this scale was not a formatting error. Second, if she walked out to the coordinator right now and said the prompt was wrong, she would lose. Fenn would shrug and say the prompt reflected the fellowship's evolving standards. The panel would hear that the regional candidate had objected to the difficulty of her question. The story would write itself. She would be the one who couldn't keep up. Third, she had not been given a harder question. She had been given a more specific one, and she knew this specific one. Fourth, she had 17 minutes left. She picked up the pen. She did not write immediately. She read the full prompt again, slowly. Then she mapped the structure of her answer in the margin. Regulatory framework first, then material science, then cost model, then the NRC fatigue data. She knew the fatigue data. She had questions about the fatigue data. She had written a 14-page independent analysis of the fatigue data 18 months ago that she had posted on a civil engineering forum and that had gotten 3 comments, 2 of which were spam. She started to write. What happened in the presentation hall during those 20 minutes was ordinary and not ordinary at the same time. The other 5 candidates presented in sequence. Each was clear and competent. The audience was polite. Fenn sat at the end of the panel table in a dark blazer, one hand flat on the table, watching. He did not look at Claudine in the 7th row. He did not know who she was. He did look at his watch at 9:14. Thea's slot was 9:25. He had planned to use the remaining transition time to step out briefly. He did not step out. He stayed where he was and watched the clock. Thea was announced at 9:23. She walked in from the side corridor carrying only a single notepad and a pen. No laptop, no slides. The fellowship had a shared projector at the front of the hall that candidates could use, but it required a USB key and she had not brought one. She had not brought one because she had not expected to need one. She had prepared a presentation with slides. None of that preparation applied anymore. She set the notepad on the lectern. She looked out at 400 people, approximately 300 of whom were there. She found her mother in the 7th row. Claudine had her hands in her lap and was sitting very straight, the way she did when she was nervous and didn't want to show it. Thea had learned that posture by watching it her entire childhood. She looked back at the panel. She began, "The prompt I received this morning asks me to address carbon-integrated concrete in tidal infrastructure with reference to the 2023 Canada Infrastructure Bank mandate and the NRC's 2019 joint paper on material fatigue in marine-adjacent structures." She paused. One beat. "I want to name that first. Because this prompt is not the standard fellowship prompt, I'm going to answer it completely. But I think it's worth the room knowing what the question actually is." Fenn's expression did not change, but his hand, flat on the table, pressed down slightly. In the 7th row, Claudine tilted her head a few degrees. She could not follow the technical content of what her daughter was describing. But she had been reading rooms her entire working life. She understood that something had just happened. She did not know yet what. Thea answered the regulatory framework section in 4 minutes. She spoke without notes for the first 2, then glanced down twice. She cited the Infrastructure Bank mandate by section number from memory. One of the Infrastructure Bank representatives at their table leaned toward the other and said something very quietly. She answered the material science section in 3 minutes and 20 seconds. She addressed the NRC paper directly, accurately, and this was the moment the room changed. She identified a gap in the paper's modeling assumptions that the NRC authors themselves had flagged in a follow-up correspondence, published in the Canadian Journal of Civil Engineering in 2021, which almost nobody in that room had read. Dr. Elaine Croft, Dalhousie's chair of structural engineering and a panel member, set down her pen. She did not pick it up again for a long time. Thea moved to the cost-benefit section. She was by the clock on the wall of the presentation hall, 9 minutes into a 20-minute slot. She had answered 2/3 of a graduate-level research question from memory in 9 minutes. Fenn shifted in his chair. Claudine, in the 7th row, had stopped sitting straight. She had leaned forward very slightly, both hands now on the arms of the chair, watching her daughters speak to 400 people about things Claudine did not understand and had never needed to understand, and had spent 22 years making sure her daughter would have the freedom to understand instead. Thea finished the cost-benefit section. She paused again. Longer this time. She looked at her notepad. She looked up. The NRC paper's fatigue model assumes a 10-year replacement cycle for the integrated composite sections, she said. I think that assumption is optimistic by about 18 months based on the tidal current data from the Northumberland Strait monitoring stations, and I wrote a short independent analysis on that in 2022 that I'd be glad to share with the panel. The hall was quiet. A journalist in the back row stopped typing. Dr. Croft looked sideways at the panel member beside her, who was already writing something on a notepad. Fenn said, from the end of the table, "If you have concerns about the model, you can submit supplementary materials after the fact. That's standard procedure." Thea looked at him. "Of course. I just wanted the panel to know the analysis exists, since the prompt specifically referenced the NRC paper." Fenn smiled tightly. "Let's keep moving. You have time remaining." She nodded. She turned back to the room. "I want to address one more thing," she said. "The question asks about regulatory barriers specifically. The Infrastructure Bank's 2023 mandate creates an interesting tension. It incentivizes low-carbon materials at the federal level, but provincial approval processes for marine-adjacent construction in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia haven't been updated since 2018. So you can have a federally approved carbon-integrated design that runs into a provincial permitting wall that wasn't built to evaluate it. That gap needs a bridge." She paused. Just barely. No pun intended. The 3 people in the front section laughed, quietly, but they laughed. Claudine did not laugh. She had gone very still. Both hands were back in her lap now, and her chin was slightly lifted. the same way it had been the morning she had watched Thea get on the school bus for the first time. A look that was not pride yet, not quite, because it was too early for pride, because pride came after, and they were still inside the moment. Thea finished at 9:40. She had used 17 of her 20 minutes. She set down her pen, picked up her notepad, and said thank you. She stepped back from the lectern. The applause started before she reached the side corridor. What does a man do when the question he designed to sink someone has instead become the best presentation of the morning? Fen did not applaud. He made a note on his scoring sheet. His expression said that he was in control of the process, and the process would produce the outcome it was supposed to produce. He had been running this panel for 11 years. He knew how to manage a room. What he did not know, could not know, was that at 7:48 that morning, before the doors of the convention center had opened, the administrative coordinator who had processed the candidate prompts had noticed the discrepancy between Thea's envelope and the other 5. She had flagged it in an internal message to the fellowship's administrative director. The message was sitting unread. The administrative director had been dealing with a parking situation since 7:30 and had not opened her inbox. But the coordinator had also, because she was methodical and had learned not to assume that flags get acted on, printed the original prompt template and the submitted version side by side and placed them in a folder on her desk. The folder was still on her desk. During the 90-minute scoring recess after all 6 presentations, the panel met in a closed room. Fen opened the discussion. He was structured, collegial, precise. He walked through each candidate's performance. When he reached Thea, he was measured, technically capable, strong on the regulatory material, presentation style somewhat unpolished. The regional context of her work, he used that word, regional, the way he always used it, limited the transferability of her approach to a national framework. Dr. Croft said quietly, she cited the 2021 follow-up correspondence. Which is fine, Fen said. Douglas, I had to look that up after the session. I didn't have it in front of me. The panel evaluates more than citation recall. We evaluate scope, vision, applied depth. She identified a gap in an NRC model from memory. She made a claim about a gap. She offered to share the analysis. After the fact, that's not the same as presenting it. There was a pause. A second panel member, Rune, who had been quiet for most of the recess, said, "What was her prompt?" Fen said it was the standard prompt, the same as the others. Rune said he hadn't thought it was. He had been listening carefully, and the regulatory specificity she had been asked to address wasn't in the standard brief. He had the standard brief in front of him. He read the relevant section aloud. The room was quiet. Fen said there were different versions of the brief for different candidate profiles. It was a customization process. The fellowship had always done this. Dr. Croft said she had been on the panel for 7 years, and this was the first she had heard of candidate-specific prompts. Rune said he was going to go get the administrative coordinator. What happened next took about 6 minutes. The coordinator brought her folder. The folder contained the original template and the submitted version, side by side, with Thea's name on the top of the submitted version and the discrepancy highlighted in yellow. The folder also contained the timestamp log from the submission system, which showed that the standard prompt had been uploaded by the committee on March 4th. Thea's prompt had been uploaded separately from Fen's individual login on March 17th. There was no committee record of the March 17th upload. Dr. Croft read the timestamp log twice. Rune went to get the administrative director. In the hallway outside, during the extended recess that had now stretched past its scheduled end, the 6 candidates sat in chairs along the wall. Thea was at the far end, 3 seats from anyone else. She had her notepad open on her knee. She was not writing in it. She was looking at the floor in the specific way of someone who is thinking very hard about something and using the floor as a neutral surface for it. She had not been told about the folder. She did not know the recess had extended because of her. She knew only that Fen had interrupted her twice, that he had used the word regional without being asked to, that the prompt she had been given was not what the other candidates had been given. She had confirmed this gently during the post-presentation coffee break, asking one of the Dalhousie candidates about his question, listening to his answer, and doing the math. She had won, and she was sitting in a hallway, not knowing if it counted. Claudine was in the hall itself, still in the 7th row, because no one had told her she could leave. She had drunk the water from her bottle. She had not touched the biscuit. She was sitting with her coat on her lap now, folded, because the room was warmer than she had expected. A woman from the CBC crew had noticed her sitting alone in the half-empty hall and come to ask if she was related to one of the candidates. Claudine had said yes. The woman had asked if she would mind being photographed. Claudine had said she didn't know. The woman had said she understood and had sat down 2 seats away, and they had waited together without talking, which was fine. At 11:14, the panel doors opened. Dr. Croft walked to the lectern. The hall refilled quickly. She spoke without preamble. Before we announce the Meridian Fellowship recipient, I want to address something that came to light during the scoring recess. She described what the coordinator had found. She described the timestamp discrepancy. She described the committee record. She did not editorialize. She read the relevant portions from the folder. She named no motives. She named no conclusions. She said, "The fellowship's charter requires that all competitive processes be administered equitably. The administrative record as it stands does not support that requirement having been met in this instance." Fenn, at the panel table, did not move. He was looking at the far wall. His hands were flat on the table. The journalist in the back row had stopped typing again, but this time his recorder was on. Dr. Croft set down the folder. "The Meridian Fellowship is awarded this year to Taya Collard." The applause began at the front and moved back through the room. It was not the polite applause of a procedural announcement. It was the kind of applause that has somewhere to go, that has been waiting for somewhere to go. Claudine pressed both hands to her face. The CBC photographer 2 seats away took the picture. It ran on the regional page of CBC Nova Scotia's website the following morning. It was not the lead image. The lead image was the folder open, with the 2 prompts side by side, which the coordinator had permitted the journalist to photograph. But the second image was Claudine. The caption read, "Claudine Collard, mother of Meridian Fellowship recipient Taya Collard, at the Halifax Convention Center, May 15th. That was all it said. It didn't need to say more. What Taya did next was not what most people would have done. She did not go to the lectern immediately. She went first to the 7th row. She went to her mother, who was still sitting, still pressing both hands to her face. Taya sat down in the seat beside her. She put her arm around her. She said nothing. Her mother made a sound that was not crying and was not laughing and was both of them at the same time. Then Taya stood up. She adjusted the borrowed blazer. She walked to the front of the hall. Dr. Croft was waiting at the lectern. She stepped aside. Taya stood at the microphone. She waited for the room to settle. "I want to say something about the prompt." The room went still. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you I knew what was happening this morning. When I opened that envelope, I didn't, not fully. I knew the question wasn't standard. I knew it was harder than what the others had. I knew I had a choice between flagging it and just answering it." She paused. "I answered it because I had spent 4 years preparing for the hardest question anyone in that room could ask me. I answered it because my mother drove a bus and cleaned hotel rooms for 22 years, so that hard questions would be the kind of hard I was ready for." She looked out at the room. The answer, by the way, was not about genius. It was about a library in Shediac that stayed open until 9, and a retired engineer named O'Coin, who lent books to a 9-year-old without asking why, and a National Research Council paper that I read because it was interesting, not because I thought I'd ever need to defend it in a room like this. She looked at her notepad. She looked up. "I'll be submitting the fatigue analysis as a supplementary document. I think the 18-month discrepancy matters. I hope someone on the panel agrees." 2 people raised their hands. She nodded. She stepped back from the microphone. What happened to Fenn in the 90 days that followed was neither dramatic nor simple. The Fellowships Board opened a review. The review found 2 prior instances in which candidate materials had been modified in ways that could not be attributed to committee process. Neither instance had been flagged at the time. One of the candidates affected had withdrawn from the process before presenting. Fenn resigned before the review concluded. He sent no public statement. His office issued a 2-sentence announcement about pursuing opportunities outside institutional settings. The woman who had been in that process and withdrawn, her name was Risa, a structural engineer from Dartmouth who had applied 4 years earlier, was contacted by the fellowship's new administrative director. She was offered the opportunity to reapply under the current cycle with her original file reinstated. She did. Sandra, the administrative coordinator who had printed the folder, received a commendation from the fellowship board. She accepted it at a small internal ceremony and said, simply, that she had done what the process required. She had flagged a discrepancy. She had kept the documentation. That was her job. That was all she said about it. Thea's supplementary fatigue analysis was published in the Canadian Journal of Civil Engineering the following February. It was 9 pages. It cited 4 sources. It was cited 12 times in its first 8 months. In the acknowledgments, she wrote, "To Claudine, who kept showing up. That's the whole thing, really. There is a bridge over the Petite Kodiak River in Moncton that Thea has driven across at least 300 times. She has looked at the water through the concrete rails every single time. She will tell you this herself. She knows now what the bridge is made of. She knows the load calculations, the material tolerances, the fatigue cycles per decade. She knows which assumptions in the original design were optimistic and by how much. But she still looks at it the same way she did at 5 years old. Like someone thought carefully about every single piece of it. She just knows now that she is one of the people who gets to think about the pieces. Claudine still takes the bus. She says she likes it. There are people in this world whose talent does not announce itself in the ways that the people in charge have decided to recognize. They don't come from the right city or the right school or the right set of recommendations. They come in borrowed blazers. They drive 4 hours on winter roads. They answer the hardest question in the room, not because they were given a fair shot, but because they spent every available year making sure they were ready for an unfair one. The prompt was designed to break something. It didn't. The folder on the coordinator's desk did the rest.